Well, welcome everybody to another episode of the Albi Afterhours Podcast. My name is Alex Duta, your host today. I am super excited to have a wonderful guest that just understands restoration, sales and marketing, and business development. She is the Chief Revenue Officer of about a dozen restoration companies that are privately owned here throughout the United States, doing over $100 million of revenue cumulatively. She has about 17 years of experience within the restoration space, formerly working with Paul Davis Corporate, helping train people in sales development. And you guys have probably all seen her all over the Facebook groups, giving just nuggets of wealth to everybody. So Ricelli, thanks so much for taking the time to be a part of our podcast. Welcome.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. It's an honor.
Did I miss anything in the intro by any chance?
No. It's one of those things that I'm like, okay, always. How would people pronounce my name? Would they ask questions about my name? And can we have fun during this whole conversation? So yeah, you nailed it. I think this is going to be great.
That's awesome. So your name's Italian, but I believe you're not Italian, right?
Isn't that so funny? One time, funny story, when I was doing route sales in Northern California, I went into this farmer's office. His name was Shlomo. And I said, nice to meet you, sir. My name is Ricelli Mordecai. And he said, no, it's not. And I'm like, pretty sure that's my name. And he was like, well, first of all, it's not pronounced Mordecai. It's pronounced Mordecai. And Mordecai is a first name, a male name in Hebrew. And Ricelli is an Italian surname. So your name should have been Mordecai Ricelli, and you should be an Italian Jew, a male Jew. And I'm like, he's still on my Facebook 14 years later. And I thought it was so funny that, yeah, my first name is an Italian last name. My last name is a Hebrew first name. And I'm from Brazil. So
awesome. Well, how long ago did you come from Brazil over to the States?
23 years ago this month.
Oh, wow.
March of 2020. Yeah.
Very nice. Well, welcome.
Crazy journey.
Yeah, I don't know if you knew about me, but I'm a first-generation Romanian American. So
isn't that awesome?
Yeah, there's something special about immigrants and kind of how we operate and how we take on the American dream. But This is not the American
That's
dream.
That's not about this. So. We'll talk about that offline, but that is so cool.
So, I want to kind of, dive in for those of you who don't know you, just kind of dive into a little bit of what you've done. Obviously, I've said that you've worked for Paul Davis as training their sales department. If we can, just dive into your experience and your work history within the restoration industry, kind of from, back 17 years ago to today.
Okay, that's a long story. So to summarize, here's how I joined the industry 17 years ago. I had just gotten married in San Diego, but we moved to the San Francisco Bay Area where my husband's from. And I found this ad on Craigslist at a time for business development. I had come from another industry. I have been in sales since I was 17, opened my first business when I was 17. And my background is marketing and fashion. That's what I went to school for. So textile cleaning, that's how I entered the industry, through a company that provides textile restoration, right? And at that time, the exciting thing was that I was one of the very few people that could tell a real Louis Vuitton from all the different levels of counterfeit. Put some CE classes, Long story short, I was with that company for a while, and some restoration companies approached me on different conversations saying, if we had somebody like you, once a week, we'll be doing 10 times the business. That's kind of how I opened my consulting business. And I did route sales for many years. Every time that somebody had questions about how their marketplace thought about their brand and what was really going on over there, they hired me or my company, somebody in my company, to do an audit of the marketplace, right? We'll go in, introduce ourselves, link to that brand, ask questions, find out what was going on. And I did that for several years. Loved it because it allowed me to have control of what a healthy pipeline looks like through local relationships. So after we did that for a number of years, my husband and I wrote a book on personality assessment. And after that, Paul Davis Restoration came along, and I was their director of sales training for a couple of years. At that time, I also acted more or less as the VP of business development for new offices from zero until their milestone, their big milestone. And some of them just needed my help to work with them to figure out what was going on and create scorecards and create processes so that they could scale and hit their numbers. And
Hmm.
that was really fun. I had so much fun. I never came home. I was home for less than a day and a half every week for a number of years, but I had so much fun because I really got to see a few things that are kind of standard regardless of the region, right? The harder you work, the luckier you get. It's a numbers game. If you don't understand your
Hmm.
averages of the number of people that you have to have in your pipeline to convert into intentional meetings to then receive the lead, you're just coming in without a purpose. What you focus on, it's what you're going to get, right? And I saw a lot of
Hmm.
people with challenges on that. And what else? Well, and then I started consulting back again, a couple of years ago. And now I have the privilege of working with amazing organizations, seeing the progress and the results that their team is experiencing. They're all experiencing, and doing sales training, which is my passion. I love doing sales training, flying in and spending a day and a half with the team, help everybody within a company understand what part they play within the sales process. And I guess that's me in a nutshell, unless I missed something, but I guess that's it.
Awesome. Yeah, that's cool. That's definitely a lot of experience. So let's talk about how you work with your clients and what your clients, what your ideal client is, what kind of engagement you have with the clients, what are the different levels of an engagement, real quick, since you mentioned the consulting thing.
Um, I think that the better way to take this is, I usually ask people, if you could rent instead of hire, would you have a VP of
Hmm.
business development helping you to strategize, create growth, help people be more effective, right? I think that is one of the things
Hmm.
that I always ask them. And the reason why I say rent instead of hire, it's because it's so funny, you guys, but what people need to remember is the following. A lot of times the owner is not the best person to manage their sales team, number one. Either because of lack of knowledge. A lot of people in our industry comes from an ops perspective. So that is a big thing that it's important that people remember. The other thing that I find very important too is that uh, it's not healthy to have a salesperson also be the sales coach or the head of the sales department. And thinking about sports analogy, you can't coach and play during the same game, right? It doesn't
Hmm.
work because a coach has an outside perspective to internal challenges. And the salesperson has an internal, the player has internal expectations or views on what they see, right? And we
Hmm.
need to put those two together. So that is what I do. So companies usually bring me in to either press the reset button or getting things started. So I come in and
Hmm.
do sales training. I have a very comprehensive sales program called Salesmasters, a day and a
Hmm.
half with the team plus 2 months of follow up. And the 2 months of follow up just helps for the retention of the material, right? Because let's be honest, how many times have we gone into a training? Super, if it's a great training, we leave super pumped up, but the next day we already forgot things, right? And then by
Hmm.
week three, if we don't have a reminder or a process for that of accountability, we lose much of the information that we have received. So that's what I do. Super passionate about sales masters. We talk about how to better the individual, how to get them pumped up by understanding their natural motivators. That comes from my personality assessment. And then we talk about strategies. How do you take that to the marketplace and how do you make money from this information? Right. So that's kind of the training in a nutshell. Aside from that, some of my clients also retain my services as the person that they either consult with to find out if something that they are doing when it comes to sales and marketing strategies is good or not. We usually look into the scorecards. A lot of companies, that's mind boggling, but a lot of restoration companies do not have scorecards for their team. And
Hmm.
they hire somebody and they say, go out there and talk to people. They don't tell them who to talk to, how many they need to talk to, the rotation in which they have to talk to all those people, what the conversation should be like, right? So that's what I do. And then I
Hmm.
structure all of that.
Hmm.
And I get my clients to be ready to function without me after I
Hmm.
spent, an assigned time with them. It's funny enough that we're very blessed within Sales Booster Solutions, our company, that we usually, as of right now, over 70% of our clients already have the next level of engagement assigned with us because they
Awesome.
want to have that support one way or another. So that's very exciting too.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And you mentioned to me that the reason you're here today is you want to give back to the restoration community, right? That has, given clearly so much to you, and you've grown so much throughout this industry. So today we're going to be diving into what I would say some of the things that restorers don't know about sales or maybe are doing wrong, right? And I'd like to start with numbers. I know you mentioned numbers. You mentioned restorers not knowing their numbers, and you mentioned having to know those numbers. So can you tell me more about what do you know about numbers? Where has that research of the numbers that you know about come from? And let's dive into that a little bit.
Awesome. So everybody, paper and pen, because I'm going to go fast here, but here's what's very exciting. When you hire somebody to come in and that person comes with no previously established relationships, I look at that person as a farmer that needs to plant a field that nobody has planted on before, right? So you need to prep the field, you need to plant all the seeds, you need to water them, then you have to make sure that you remove the bugs, and then, when harvest season comes, you're going to get the fruit. Same concept, right? But here's what happens in the industry. When, even with my experience, if somebody was to bring me in to be their field salesperson, and I have never been to that territory before, I will tell them, for every 3 accounts that I build a relationship with, I'm going to get 1 lead per year in the first year. So first of all, we need to understand that the numbers are brutal. They are very hard to digest, because when I hire somebody, I'm telling that person, you're going to be in and out of your car 80 plus times per week visiting with accounts, right? Because if I want your efforts to result into 8 to 10 leads, very conservatively speaking, those are averages, nationwide averages, but they are what they are. If I want the phone to be ringing 8 to 10 times a month per rep that I have, that person has to be managing about 320 accounts. And what is managing an account? What does managing an account actually mean? It means that I'm engaging with these people every 3 to 4 weeks, putting them through my sales funnel so that I can take them from prospect to a qualified prospect. Like, I sat down and we're able to have a purposeful conversation where from that conversation, I'm able to qualify and quantify them and see the impact that their referrals can have on my business from 2 different points of view. Number 1, revenue. But number 2, how do we support that revenue internally? Right? Because the worst mistake we can ever make is to hire somebody to make the phone ring. And when the phone rings, we're like, we're too busy, can't answer. Right? That's not good. That's not good business practices. But because of the numbers, I can tell an owner or a general manager, with this person, you need to be ready to add this number of leads to your pipeline 90 days from now. What's that going to look like for you? So those are one of the numbers that I talk to people about a lot. So 320 accounts is going to produce you about 106 leads per month, especially if those people are trained. But if they're trained, people that go through my sales training, they sometimes are able to produce double that in the first year because they have quality to their quantity, right? So when people sometimes says
these 320 accounts. Oh, go on. No,
please. The 320 accounts. Go ahead.
We have those 320 accounts, right? You're saying that we're stopping every 3 to 4 weeks to kind of recap for the people listening, right? So we take a book of business of those 320, we give them to an account manager. That account manager is cycling through every 3 to 4 weeks. What kind of questions or what kind of interactions are those account managers having in order for those accounts to at least bring in the minimum leads that you claim to bring?
So the first thing that we need to remember is this: not every seed is going to sprout, and that's why I need that number, right? So why do I need this many when people can only maintain relationships with 150 people? Because I don't know who will and who won't until I put them through the process, right? So the one thing that I suggest to everybody is, as soon as you stop by, the least amount of commitment that you can still leave with is it okay if every now and then when I'm in the area, stop by and say hi? Come on. Less than 1% will say, no, please don't ever come back again. I don't know where, where people are located. Some areas might be a bit higher than that, but people will be like, okay. And why is that important? Because when I come back, I have higher chances of having a better conversation. The old saying of people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, spot on when you're building local relationships, right? And that's the difference between trading a lead per money, right? So if people are buying leads from plumbers, you need to understand that you need to factor that in your cost of job acquisition. And,
Mm-hmm.
that's similar to digital leads. But with relationships, we go in, and that's what I want. When I'm able to sit down in front of them and ask questions, if it's an insurance agent, I want to know what mix of their business is property versus auto.
Mm-hmm.
Heard a crazy story one time. A person had been visiting with the same agent for over a year to finally ask, okay, so tell me more about your business. And they're like, well, we do most like auto insurance, right? And the person saying, why didn't you ever tell me that? And the agent said, you never asked. And you're a nice
Mm-hmm.
girl, can come by and all of that. So we need to ask, what is their business mix like? We need to identify and have parameters of what our ideal client looks like. And we won't have time to go into that. People need to know what do their ideal client look like, right?
Mm-hmm.
And those are the people that you need to fill up your pipeline with, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the most underused question out there is, walk me through your process. Could you please
Okay.
tell me about your process? People don't ask that. They ask, who are you using? Do you call claims? What company are you using? This and that. But they never ask this brilliant open-ended question of, could you tell me more about your business and your process for handling this? When you
Mm-hmm.
ask people to walk you through their process, you're giving them permission and encouragement to tell you the whole story,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's the same with people trying to memorize a script about what makes me different than my competitor restoration. People say, are you the same as competitor restoration? My first question is, what do you know about competitor restoration?
Mm-hmm.
How can I say if I'm different if I don't understand what the perspective is on what can make us different or equals,
Super smart.
right?
Super smart.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So those are the numbers. So that's the first thing on the numbers. So an ideal week, I would say, is 80 stops, 5 scheduled meetings, 5 intentional meetings, meetings that you can ask questions about their process and engage with them, right?
Mm-hmm.
See those people. The other number is to understand, once you know that this is going to produce about 100 or so leads, what are your internal conversions? Leads to
Mm-hmm.
calls,
Mm-hmm.
leads to job signed.
Mm-hmm.
Some companies don't know. Industry average, 70%. So if you're below 70%, Houston, we might have a problem, right? People need to
Mm-hmm.
talk about that. And from that point on, so when you factor that in, let's say 70%, then from 106 leads, you're left with what, 72 jobs?
Mm-hmm.
Multiply that by your average job size. And then
Mm-hmm.
you're going to see how much that person is going to be producing through the implementation of this process,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Got it.
Certain time I was talking to a company and their conversions were 50%. Their average job size was $2,000. And it
Mm-hmm.
was going to be costing them 70 cents on the dollar to produce the
Mm-hmm.
job. And I'm like, you don't have a marketing or business development challenge. You have an internal ops challenge of
Mm-hmm.
why a one-stop shop restoration company like yours has an average job size of $2,000 and a
Mm-hmm.
conversion of less than 50%. So
Mm-hmm.
those are
Super
my
cool.
thoughts.
Very valuable nuggets there. So you didn't mention anything about number of donuts though in the numbers, right?
Oh gosh, isn't that
Why
crazy?
is
I
that?
love donuts. If they're Krispy
Yeah.
Kreme donuts, that's even better. You know, funny thing, Alex, is that people say, I don't want a donut dropper. And I tell them, you can't even afford a donut dropper because what I'm
Mm-hmm.
proposing is 300 stops per month.
Mm-hmm.
Multiply that by the average size of a donut box is what, $15? Let's do this
Yeah.
math real, you know what I mean? Like you can't afford that. You just
Mm-hmm.
cannot afford, you know, let's say it's $15 for the cheap donuts, $4,800 worth of donuts per month,
Yep.
right? So
That's
it's
as
not
much as the
about,
base salary for that marketer spent in
right,
donuts. And what
right,
value does it bring?
which is another thing because without scorecards and expectations, I was creating a scorecard for a client the other day and we were talking about splitting that monthly salary, if you will, half of base and the other half tied to activity, right? The
Mm-hmm.
activity meaning the number of visits that are documented because, CRM, right? Are people utilizing CRMs to document things or are they saying, I think they are doing something?
Mm-hmm.
What? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Yeah.
So let's unpack that. Like, why is it important for you as the business owner, or the leader, or the sales manager to know and have documented every single stop and information on all of those stops and use things like pipelines and funnels that you kind of mentioned? Why is that even important?
It's funny that we even have to talk about that, right? Everybody should know. I tell everybody, like I say, here's why you document things. First, for yourself. You're managing 300 plus
Mm-hmm.
accounts, you're bound to forget things, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
usually joke with people, first for yourself, because if you wake up with amnesia, then you have your notes
Mm-hmm.
to go back to and create that call continuum, right? Second,
Mm-hmm.
if
Mm-hmm.
you win the lottery and move to Hawaii, those notes don't belong to you, they belong to the owner of the
Mm-hmm.
company, right? So
Mm-hmm.
at any given time, anybody in my team needs to be able to access those notes. What if I tell a company, one of the things that I love to teach and that I do is to create the business profile of a company, right? I ask them the things that are most important to them when they give me a job, that one thing that if I were to do, essentially they would never want to work with me again. I'm documenting that.
Mm-hmm.
Person in my office picks up the phone, doesn't look at my notes because I either didn't put them over there or, whatever, and they do something that is the opposite from what I promised or from what those people asked
Mm-hmm.
me to do. That's business suicide, right?
Yep.
So things need to be documented. I don't need it to see that's for the owners and managers over there. I don't need people to tell me that they told them that we do water, fire, mode, blah, 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 blah. I already know that I do that. What
Mm-hmm.
do I need to know about the conversation that if that person wins the lottery and goes to Hawaii, I can say, hey, Ricelli was the one here and she used to visit with you. And by the way, she said you're going to be going on a trip to Aruba. How is
Mm-hmm.
that? Right. And that person's like, they actually know me. They talked about me. And then that
Mm-hmm.
agent, that property manager, that plumber feels valued and special because we
Mm-hmm.
took notes. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
it's essential. The other part about notes that's very important is finding a way to always look for people that might have been connected to that job.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we look at those opportunities, you have purposes for talking to people. I understand
Mm-hmm.
you're the agent from the Mrs. Johnson job. We're working with her right now. Or I understand that you came by to take care of the roof and,
Mm-hmm.
we were called in later on to do the job. Would love to see if we can schedule a time to talk about,
Yep.
how and if we can collaborate. So notes, if it's not there, it didn't happen. That's
Mm-hmm.
it.
So earlier when we were talking, you mentioned of a company, and we won't name the company, but they started out doing like 90% vendor work, right? 8 years later, grew and scaled themselves into not doing as much vendor work, just based on the fact that they used those relationships on the jobs. You mind filling us more a little bit on that?
Love it. Okay, so first year they did short of $1 million. 90% of their work came from vendors, program work from their corporate TPAs. And because the focus was, let's make sure that every time we capture a lead, either from program, digital, however, we know who the adjuster is, if it's filed as a claim, who the agent is. Was there a roofer over there? Do they have a property manager? Was there a plumber involved? And we documented all of that, and we put those contacts through the pipeline so that we could qualify and quantify them. Close to 10 years later, this company did close to $40 million with 70+% of all their leads coming from those direct relationships, right? One way or
Wow.
another. And that for me is the power of being mindful of opportunities. I call them double dipping. And I know that we usually don't talk about double dipping because, you go to a party and
Mm-hmm.
double dipping is not right. But in this case, double dipping, you guys, that's what you should do. You need to double dip. You need to take notes. You needed to know who do you know, were you involved, and then having those meaningful conversations as a way to break the cycle that some restoration companies have with depending on the carrier to send work or depending on their programs of relationships with the franchisor, this and that, because those relationships, when addressed correctly, are gold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think for our audience to walk away right now and implement within their business on every single loss, whether it comes from a third party administrator, it comes from online, just ask that customer, hey, who's your insurance agent? And put that into your job management system slash CRM, and then go after those, because those are low hanging fruits. We can start the relationship with that person while we're working on the house. And then once we're done, we can even get the homeowner to rave back to the insurance agent about how an amazing job we did. And then they become a great prospect that we can then build a relationship for future leads. So that's genius.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's awesome.
So So let's give more nuggets. Talk to me more about that scorecard. What kind of things do we want to see on a scorecard? What do we want to on a weekly basis or monthly basis kind of be monitoring specifically?
Very important question. We need to remember that there are only two ways to identify success in a business development, outside sales, however you want to call the position: revenue or activity that is proven to be linked to a possible revenue. And that is it, right? The revenue is
Mm-hmm.
simple. I want that person to do 100,000 in sales per month. 100,000 comes through, great. They are doing things.
Perfect.
And in those cases, they still need to document everything. I don't care who they are. They need to document the relationships. Um, and the second
Mm-hmm.
is activity that leads up to the revenue, like we were talking about. So when I create
Mm-hmm.
scorecards, my portion of the scorecard usually has those activities. This is what I'm expecting. I'm expecting this number of stops. I'm expecting this number of scheduled meetings or intentional meetings. I'm expecting some companies, they have, one of my clients, he has a number of counter days at plumbing supply stores that have to be factored over there. And we reward people for those first levels of engagement that we know it will produce revenue down the road, but it's not producing today on day one, right? Which gives the
Mm-hmm.
right account manager a sense of accomplishment. I
Mm-hmm.
can't guarantee, I cannot produce $100,000 in leads today, but I can produce. I'm not gonna come home until I have had my 20 stops and had one meaningful meeting. That's something that I
Mm-hmm.
can hold myself accountable to, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
scorecards are important that we have that. The other thing too in creating a scorecards is having healthy numbers for conversions and revenue. We talked about that. If we see this number of visits, we're going to have this number of leads. From those leads, what percentage from your own metrics of the past 2 years will convert into jobs? From your
Mm-hmm.
own numbers, what is your average job size that I can multiply that to? And then I will understand what the revenue is that will be associated with that. And sometimes I see a huge disconnect between what people expect and what the
Mm-hmm.
numbers tell, right?
Mm-hmm.
Both
Mm-hmm.
in lack of activity. I was talking to a company the other day, and their numbers were very sad. It should never cost a company overall more than 15 cents on the dollar to cost of job acquisition. For every $100 of the job, $15 should go into how you acquired it. And in this company,
Mm-hmm.
for every $100, it was going to cost them $236, right? Because the
Wow.
numbers were,
Wow. Mm-hmm.
lack of engagement, lack of structure. And I see that a lot. I also see people having internal numbers that don't make sense. And when we factor in all the accounts that a person can actually manage, I tell them, I said, that's not going to work. You're going to need 3 people for that. And they were like, well, I
Mm-hmm.
can't afford 3 people. I said, well, so let's make some adjustments internally first, because this
Mm-hmm.
is not aligning, right, with what your numbers can produce. So a scorecard is what's going to help you celebrate successes, make adjustments, and hold people accountable. And that should be presented
Awesome.
on the first day on the job. They sign, and
Mm-hmm.
that's how we start. That's how we roll. And that is important because we should never manage people. We manage
Mm-hmm.
systems and we coach people in how to execute those systems. That's it.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, I talk about transactional versus transformational leadership. And, with transactional leadership, you tell people what to do, you check that they've done it, you say next. In transformational, you tell them the outcome you want, you have a system in place to where you can measure it, and then you coach that person. If they didn't get the outcome, you go back and you ask them, well, why didn't we hit that outcome? Let's see what we could do differently. So, how often do you recommend as a sales leader, manager, or owner to sit down and have a one on one with that rep, right, and go over the numbers and coach?
So coaching sessions should be once a month. Sorry, once a week. I What I usually do for
Okay.
my clients is that I hold a sales meeting every week with their whole team.
Mm-hmm.
We do a sales huddle
Mm-hmm.
on a daily basis, and we do a coaching
Mm-hmm.
call with each individual. And then once a month, we're looking at the
Mm-hmm.
scorecard together, right? So I will say that
Got it.
you need to be in touch with people 15 minutes every day. Come together, celebrate something, assign, share that one thing that you need to do, share that one thing that you're stuck on and you need help with. And then once a week we come together, we look at the numbers as a team. And then on those one-on-one calls, we look at adjustments, which brings me back to again the CRM and the idea that A lot of leaders tell people, why don't you, you need to write this down, but are you reading what they are writing down? That's very
Mm-hmm.
important. I read everything for my clients. I'm reading
Mm-hmm.
reports before I go into a meeting to provide feedback, because if I don't know what's going on, I'm not qualified to tell people what needs to be done.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, that was a lot of valuable information for our audience here. I really appreciate you sharing it with them. A lot of great numbers, a lot of great metrics and benchmarks. Kind of going in that final thought for me is, what do you believe a first year? Well, one, what's the ramp up period on a first business development hire, and two, what do you think like a first year quota of revenue brought in for a business development rep in an average market?
So ramp up phase, 90 days, right? It takes 90 days for you to
Okay.
get the pipeline going. Number of revenue, very tough to say, because I look through the numbers, and when I
Okay.
multiply the number of jobs signed by the average job size of a company, that's when I know what's going to be happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've worked with some companies that had people that on their first year, one of my clients, guy that we brought in, $3.4 million on his first year, right?
Wow.
Because of job of average
Large
job
job
size.
sizes.
Exactly. That makes a huge difference. I've also worked with some people
Mm-hmm.
that I'm like, wow, this is going to cost you a lot, because your average job size, it's only going to scale up to $350,000 for the person. And I have
Mm-hmm.
also worked with
Mm-hmm.
people that they did not even know what to expect. And when I tell them we apply these numbers, this person is on track to make $1 million, they're like, is that even possible? And I'm like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's how the numbers work. So we need to look at each individual number, but the average for an average marketplace, it should be $1 million. If the conversions are right, for every 100 leads, you're going to be signing 70 jobs. And if your average job size is over $10,000, that's 1272, which is the industry standards. That should
Mm-hmm.
get really close to those numbers.
Got it. Awesome. Very, very, very helpful. Is there a specific question that I didn't ask that you would have liked me to ask?
No. Is there any question that you think you should still ask that you didn't ask?
Oh.
Oh.
I mean, I've been itching to get into deep things, but I notice you have this tendency to do what's called reversing, right? Which is a sales technique where if somebody asks you a question, you ask them the question back in a different way, and you try to get that person, you try to get deeper. And I think you actually mentioned it. I don't know if it was here or before when we were talking about a situation where you're at an insurance agent's office and the insurance agent asks you, well, how are you different than your competitor? And then you had a unique answer where you reversed it back and you asked what?
I asked, what do you know about that company?
Why?
Why do I ask that? The reason
Yes.
I think that that's very important, because when people ask me if I'm the same as something and I don't know what value they had assigned to that thing, whatever I answer from that point on, it can be bad, right? And I have a theory.
Mm-hmm.
My theory is, I strongly believe that we can never say the right thing to the wrong person. I honestly
Mm-hmm.
believe that. Even the best sermon ever given to humanity, there's some people that didn't believe in that. So you can never say the right thing to the wrong person. But if you're not
Mm-hmm.
careful, you might end up saying the wrong thing to the right
To the
person,
right person.
right? So somebody says to me, are you just like competitor restoration? What information does that give me? I'll give you
Mm-hmm.
guys an example. My teenage son a couple months ago asked me, Mom, did you check into my phone? That question gave me no information about the big picture. So I had to say to him, why do you think that I looked into your phone? And he says, well, because I'm a teenager. And I said, what does that mean? He was like, teenagers are crazy. And I said, what kind of things are teenagers doing that's making you say that teenagers are crazy? 20 minutes later, I'm looking at everything that's happening in my son's life. He's sharing his password with me. We're looking at things together. And not once I answered his question of whether or not I had checked into his phone. And I
Wow.
use that as a way to explain to people that if what people are asking you does not give you content that allows you to give them a smart, not reactive, but a smart, thought out answer, I need to ask questions of clarification. Are
Mm-hmm.
you just like competitor restoration? What does that mean? Right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what that means. So I need to ask them, what do you know about them? Well, I hate
Mm-hmm.
them. What do you hate about them? Right? Now I'm getting into what's really going on so that at the end I can say, I'm nothing like those guys, or I can say, I'm very similar. And considering that you went from a previous company to them, would you consider going from them to me and giving it a try?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's
Yep.
essentially why I suggest that question.
100%. Versus being reactive and going to your spiel of, oh my God, we're so much better because we're ISCRC certified and blah, 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 right? So, cool. Well, this
Yeah,
was
cool.
very fun. Thank you
This
so
is
much
fun.
for taking your time. Obviously, time is the most valuable asset we have here, and thank you for spending half of the hour with me here. Really appreciate it. It means a lot.
My pleasure. My pleasure.